Let's just rip the band-aid off. Lena Dunham is a very controversial figure in Hollywood, but she wouldn't be half as controversial if she wasn't ugly. In fact, Lena Dunham is a perfect example of how we discriminate against ugly people and then gaslight them about it. But no more. Today is the day we finally acknowledge that if pretty is a privilege, ugly is a curse. My big sister Bim is the reason why I understood how beauty standards dictates who gets to be beautiful before I ever heard or understood any of those words. You see, I have a tribe of sisters who all look like different Pokemon evolutions of me. And luckily for all of our self-esteems, my big sister always knew she was a beautiful gal. And when I say she knew she was a beautiful gal, I mean, she used to go by Abby the Goddess, and then she eventually upgraded that to Abby the Empress. So what growing up with the same face as my big sister who knew she was beautiful meant was that she refused to let any of us even entertain the idea that we were ugly. Because if we were ugly, then she was ugly, and she knew damn well she wasn't ugly. My big sister truly took building our self-esteem seriously. I remember being in maybe grade 6 when she created a document on the computer where she had essentially cropped up images of all of our facial features and explained why each feature on our face was beautiful because she overheard one or more of us saying something negative about our looks. But there's one particular thing my big sister would say all the time that exposed the world for what it was. She told us that we were beautiful. We just weren't in style yet. Let me explain what she meant by that. My mother is Bahamian, my father is Nigerian, and I was born and raised in the Bahamas. Although I've now been in America for the majority of my life, for the xenophobes who like to pretend I just arrived in America yesterday and have no right to speak. Anyway, while I love my Bahama land dearly, one of the worst leftovers from slavery and colonization is a beauty standard that says beauty is light skin and curly hair. In addition to my big sister, I was fortunate to have a mother who, despite embodying the light skin curly hair standard for beauty that the Bahamas favor, she had made sure to preemptively expose and denounce colorism as a symptom of what she used to call an inferiority complex. So that by the time I experienced colorism, I understood that it was not my problem. My mom actually worked overtime to tell my sister and I that our dark skin was more beautiful than her light skin, which wasn't something she said because she didn't think her skin was beautiful or just as beautiful as ours, but because she understood that in our society that said only her skin was beautiful, she needed to go out of her way to ensure her dark-skinned daughters never internalized that. So she made us the standard of beauty in our household. And the reason she did that was because my mother was responding to the same reality that my big sister was speaking to when she said that we were beautiful, we just weren't in style. What my big sister was trying to tell us was that we were beautiful as a matter of fact, but whether we get recognized as beautiful by others is based on what kind of beauty is in style and who is allowed to be beautiful according to it. Because my sister told me that, I always understood my own beauty to be a fact of life that other people just hadn't caught on to yet and would not always catch on to, depending on the environment's cultural understanding of beauty. And then one day, in what my heart tells me was 2006, but Google tells me was 2004, the song African Queen dropped and put me on the map, you will. And you are my African queen, the girl of my dreams. I was finally in style, which provided me an early lesson about beauty, desirability, and my relationship to it, which was that to be African in and of itself was to be inherently unattractive and undesirable. No one had even bothered to consider my looks or whether I was attractive until they were first given permission to think African could be beautiful, a queen at all. To be African was to be precluded from beauty until the culture shifted a little bit to make space for me, till we were in style. And while that shift made space for me, the belief that African is precluded from beauty is no less alive. All throughout my life, and especially so now that I exist on the internet where thousands of people tell me what they think. Whenever anyone wants to paint me as undesirable in any way, they always emphasize that I'm African. It does not matter that my accent clearly tells the tale of where I'm actually from, or that I've never been to Nigeria. You will never come across a person who's declaring that I am in some way unattractive or less than that does not describe me solely as African, which isn't inherently a problem. I do have a Nigerian face, but they never acknowledge that I'm Bahamian or Caribbean, because African is the definition of ugliness in a culture that says Eurocentric beauty is the standard. Caribbean doesn't have the same perception that has been given to African. In fact, Caribbean has been exoticized and made desirable in many ways. But all that aside, that song African Queen put me on the map and confirmed what my big sister told me. Who was recognized as beautiful was determined by what was in style and who and what our different communities were told was beautiful. And throughout life, I have continued seeing the style shift in and out of my favor. Mostly in, because the rise of bad bitches, big titties, dramatic proportions, and thick bitch appreciation really made sure I had to stop playing with me. So I grew up believing I was beautiful, but not the beauty standard. And knowing that whether my beauty was recognized in all its glory depended on what community I was in and what that community's idea of beauty was, because beauty wasn't really about facts. It was about the collective understanding of what was in style. I was in primary school when African Queen dropped, and that was the first time I really thought about beauty and my relationship to beauty. But the first time I ever really thought about ugliness and what it meant to navigate life ugly was a month after I graduated undergrad, when a college friend of mine forced it into my consciousness. I was in the bar with my friend Bria, and we saw another friend of ours who I'll call Betty, and she was making out with another friend of ours, Sam. So Betty and Sam were obviously drunk as making out, and very much so giving nerds gone wild. So me and Bria pulled Betty into the bathroom to make sure she wasn't too drunk to consent, to which she replied that she didn't really want to hook up with Sam. She actually wanted to hook up with our friend Ray, to which Bria and I replied, oh, okay, cool. Go hook up with Ray then. Which Betty quickly shot down with, I can't. But me and Bria didn't understand what she was talking about, so we were just like, oh, okay, I guess, all right, well, I could put another guy in the bar if you want then. To which she again told us that she couldn't. So Bria and I are just kind of staring at her confused before she finally just made it plain to us that she was ugly, that people thought she was ugly, and that she did not have a pick of men in the bar, so she felt she had to settle for Sam. When I tell y'all she said that shit and me and Bria basically did this, that happened more than 10 years ago now. But ever since my friend told me to my face in no uncertain terms that I did not understand her experience trying to navigate dating and hooking up because I wasn't ugly, I have thought about ugliness ever since. Specifically, how we treat ugly. And by ugly, I don't necessarily mean people I personally find ugly. Although, sometimes I'm not gonna sit up here and do that thing where I pretend I don't think anyone's ugly because beauty is an eye of the beholder or some shit like that. No, I think people are ugly. Sometimes I even call people ugly, and so do you. But for the purposes of this video, when I say ugly people, I don't mean based on my individual opinion. I mean people who the larger society considers ugly because they deviate too far from the beauty standard in one way or another. People who structurally fall into ugly, but we'll expound later. I know it sounds wild as to hear someone just casually call someone who we're not trying to emotionally harm ugly as a matter of fact, but the reason that feels wild as the taboo around ugliness is part of the problem we're tackling today. So you're gonna have to just take a couple of deep breaths and trust that by the end of this video, you will understand why it was necessary that I just say ugly straight up in this video. And I double and triple check with the expert on all things beauty, ugliness, and desirability themselves, the incomparable Deshaun Harrison, whose book Belly of the Beast I will be pulling from throughout this video, and whom I also called up, because if you were personally friends with the author of one of your primary sources, it makes sense to take advantage of that privilege and call them. So call them. I did.
Because folks who are feeling the effects of desirability, who are feeling the effects of the libido economy, who are feeling the effects of lookism or whatever it is that you want to use, have already deeply internalized the feelings that come with that experience. And so my investment is in acknowledging that ugliness is a structural thing, that it is a structural identity, or that rather it is an identity that is structured by so much about how the rest of the world works, under desire, without necessarily making that person or any other person feel like they are ugly just for ugly's sake. If that
so
makes
don't
sense.
call Lena Dunham ugly. What you're saying is I shouldn't just start the video calling Lena Dunham ugly is what you're saying.
Oh no, you can. I mean, no. So again, when I'm having When I'm having structural conversations, it's gonna be what it's gonna be. And in terms of structure, ugly absolutely is part of that. So
Okay, thank you.
she is what she is. For a white woman, Lena is ugly.
I think a lot about ugly people because as a person who does socio-political analysis of people and events for a living and spends my time in spaces with other people who do the same thing, I am regularly confronted with the fact that we not only have no trouble factoring in how race, gender, sexuality, age, financial status, nationality, citizenship status, educational background, you name it, factors into how a person is perceived and treated. We require it. Yet, even in those hyper-aware and honest spaces of analysis, lookism is still always the elephant in the room, with no one ever willing to acknowledge how a person's beauty or ugliness plays just as significant a role in how they experience life as any of the other isms we readily acknowledge.
My cousin went to a Halloween party and made out with a guy, and she's hideous. I mean, really hideous. How'd your cousin do it? She wore a mask. Don't you get it? If we wear our masks and we don't take them off for the whole party, the boys won't know who we are, and we'll have a better chance of hooking up. Good idea! We are so gonna hook up! I think we look hot. Totally hot.
Ugly bitches!
Moo!
I think, like, hearing you talk about the story with your friend, particularly at the bar, I think it resonates with me because I've had a very similar conversation with some of my friends. I don't go out. I don't go out to bars. I don't really go out, like, whenever my friends, and this has been true for me for years. Like when I was in college, my friends would go out to clubs, would go to different bars and whatnot, and I would rarely join them. And they would always be like, why don't you like to go out with us? Why don't you want to be with the, and I say my friends, but this is just a certain group of friends. I have a wide range of friends. But this certain group of friends, I never went out with, and they could never understand why I didn't want to go out with them. And then we went to New Orleans one day, and we were on Bourbon Street, and we went to this gay bar on Bourbon Street, and I was there with about five or six of my friends. By the end of that night, I was in that bar by myself. All of them had been
Coached by somebody,
by some other person in the space, because all of them are beautiful people, and they could not, like, they didn't even recognize the fact that they had convinced me to go out to this bar as friends. Like, we were supposed to be there as a friend group, and I was already very, 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 like, against the idea of it, because I've been to several bars with them in the past. I know what that experience is like, and I know how I present to everyone else. All the folks that I was with, they were thin, muscular, just very, like, beautiful people. And yeah, by the end of that night, it didn't even take long, they were all with someone else, and I was just standing there in the bar without my friends and without anyone else. And that experience is something that people, unless you are, like, made aware of this or are acutely aware of, like, what that feels like because of your personal experience, you don't know what it feels like to navigate that type of dynamic. And it's something that you feel you just are not aware. You're just not aware of that. These are all these friends that I went out with are folks who have read my book, who are brilliant people, who know all about, fat phobia and anti-Blackness as it relates to what I have shared with them, what I've taught them.
Yeah.
And still, that was the experience.
Recently, I was having a conversation with a bunch of my creative friends. We were watching a dating show together, and in response to people on the show complaining about the different reasons they felt they were discriminated against in dating, my friends began to talk about how those things never seemed to be problems for them in dating, that they'd always found that whoever they were romantically interested in was attainable. To which I replied, why, yes, of course. That's because we're all attractive people in most of the spaces we occupy and date in. That's not the case for ugly people. And when I tell you these was staring at me like deers in headlights, you could have heard a pin drop as my friends looked at me stunned because I said the thing you're not supposed to say about yourself or others. You should have seen my friends squirming at the idea of openly acknowledging our own attractiveness and the different ways it benefits us in our lives. All my friends started half-heartedly trying to downplay their looks and mumble some garbage about how they don't think anyone's necessarily ugly and beauty's in the eye of the beholder. So I pressed my room full of pretty lion-ass friends who all amass hundreds and thousands of followers between us. So I said to these, you think your looks have nothing to do with your dating experiences? Or amassing the following you did? And I know you are lying because every one of you is an on-camera personality who puts your face on every thumbnail, which is a choice. And we know why that choice is made. And everybody stared silently, unable to deny what we know to be fact, but unwilling to acknowledge it because ironically enough, it's considered unattractive to acknowledge your own attractiveness, which is a testament to how even our refusal to recognize how beauty and its privileges are real is in service of being attractive, being beautiful.
What did she say at the end? I am pretty and I acknowledge the privilege that has aided me and
thank you. That's all I needed. Thank you.
I think that the knee-jerk, I bet you it's the same reaction that white people will probably think of like when they're trying to admit to white privilege to an extent. Because like what goes in the head is just gonna be all like, but I work hard, or like, but I do this and I do that, and I do all this other thing.
My advocacy is guided by a very simple mantra, and that's this: we cannot fix a problem we do not acknowledge exists. So I'm going to hold your polite little hands when I say this. We will never fix a society that discriminates against ugly people if you keep pretending that no one is ugly, and thus that no one is feeling the effects of being discriminated against for being ugly. People have no problem acknowledging that pretty privilege is real and exactly who benefits from it with the quickness. But as soon as we try to acknowledge who's ugly and being treated like shit as a result, all of a sudden people start gasping and clutching their pearls, pretending they don't see ugly, because people think ugly is the worst thing you can be. You know how it's problematic when a white person tells you they don't see color? Because while they think they're saying that your race is irrelevant to them and thus not something they're perceiving negatively or holding against you, what it really means is they're failing to acknowledge how your race impacts your experiences, how you move through the world, and how people see and treat you. You know how that is? Yeah, well, it's similarly problematic when we won't acknowledge ugly people and how they experience the world. Because of the taboo around ugly in a society that privileges beauty, most people have a knee-jerk reaction to pretend ugliness is not real, totally subjective, which, while not entirely untrue and well-intentioned, it unfortunately renders the real discrimination people experience invisible. There is a similar problematic reluctance to acknowledging one's own beauty and the benefits that comes from it. Today, we're going to take a real deep dive into Lookism, and Lookism as an epistemic injustice. But before we do that, let me tell you about today's sponsor, Ground News. Ha! You say I did that? Before we get into Lookism, let's take a look at Sydney Sweeney's recent American Eagle ad praising her good genes. This is a great example of this dynamic at play. While many outlets framed it as lighthearted or empowering, a look across coverage shows a noticeable imbalance. Left-leaning sources state that Sydney Sweeney's new campaign draws fire for racial undertones, salon, while some right-leaning headlines state lunatic leftists blast Sydney Sweeney's American Eagle jeans ad as Nazi propaganda. Breitbart, which is why Ground News is always my go-to, and they're truly the perfect sponsor for this video, because making sure the media we're consuming is objective and unbiased is literally their bread and butter. Not only does their app and website let you compare how the media is framing any given story worldwide and get context on each source, in this particular climate where everyone is targeting you with clickbait and misinformation, where it's hard to tell what's real, what's fake news, and what's just straight up propaganda or maybe even AI, a tool like Ground News is invaluable. With Ground News, we can also see that there's been over 350 articles published on this specific story, the political bias for each source, and who owns them. Ground News really cannot be beat because it makes it so easy for me to make sure that I am not lying to you. Go to ground.news/Olay or scan the QR code on screen to subscribe. Ground News is giving my viewers 40% off their unlimited access Vantage plan. This is their best deal of the year and it'll only be available for a limited time, so you better jump. And Ground News is subscriber funded, so you won't see any ads on their website, which contributes to the sensationalism and clickbait reporting we're trying to avoid. So by subscribing, you're not only getting an amazing resource, but you're supporting their work directly and helping keep media reporting honest. Thank you for sponsoring this video, Ground News. What is lookism, or who is ugly? Lookism refers to discrimination based on physical attractiveness. Positive lookism refers to positive discrimination based on physical beauty. In other words, pretty privilege. And negative lookism refers to the negative treatment and discrimination people experience for being ugly. And I think it is worth pointing out that while my focus in this particular video is how lookism, particularly negative lookism, harms ugly people, it is important to note that even pretty people are harmed under lookism. For example, because we live in both a sexist and a lookist society, despite the fact that both men and women can and do benefit from pretty privilege in their professional and romantic lives, the concept is usually only thought of in relation to women, and with the specific negative connotation of assuming beautiful women are not earning their success, sleeping their way to the top, or gold digging off of whatever man they're with. Think back to the last presidential election when Kamala Harris, not just being a woman, but specifically being a beautiful woman, had people using the concept of pretty privilege to accuse her of sleeping her way to the top and all kind of nonsense going through this woman's whole dating catalog, child. Anyway, back to lookism. If beautiful people experience pretty privilege and negative lookism refers to the discrimination ugly people experience, it begs the question, who gets to be beautiful and who is ugly?
Genes are passed down from parents to offspring, often determining traits like hair color, personality, and even eye color. My genes are blue.
Sydney Sweeney, Casper Jeans.
Unfortunately for most people, including even those who appear to or manage to meet the beauty standard, the beauty standard is the Eurocentric beauty standard, which says that to be beautiful, to have access to the benefits that beauty comes with, is to be white, thin, straight-haired, blonde-haired, blue-eyed, or otherwise in possession of Eurocentric facial features, which is precisely what Sydney Sweeney's American Eagle ad was speaking to. This idea that to be blonde, blue-eyed, and thin is to have superior genes, that beauty is limited to those who meet this mark. And Sydney Sweeney is a really good example of what I mean when I say that this Eurocentric beauty standard harms everyone, even those that appear to meet it and access its benefits. Because while Sydney Sweeney gets to be the face of this white supremacist beauty standard, Sydney Sweeney herself ain't even a natural blonde. She dyes her hair blonde in order to meet the standard. The consequences of a Eurocentric beauty standard are that by virtue of being non-white, fat, disabled, or gender non-conforming is to be ugly, or at least not beautiful, undesirable, in the eyes of a society that rewards those who meet the beauty standard. Which is why, in the early 19th and 20th century, America had ugly laws, which were laws that prohibited unsightly or disfigured individuals, typically those with visible disabilities, from appearing in public. In other words, the kind of laws that had Quasimodo locked away in the Hunchback of Notre Dame. Quiet as kept. The Hunchback of Notre Dame is a perfect example of both positive and negative lookism, because Quasimodo is discriminated against for being ugly, while Esmeralda is discriminated against for being beautiful. Being ugly gets Quasimodo imprisoned to a tower because Frollo thinks he's too ugly to be seen. But being beautiful almost gets Esmeralda killed too, because Frollo is so thirsty for her that he decides she must be tempting him, and thus of the devil. The result of ugly laws was the ostracization, criminalization, and abuse of people with disabilities. People were required to hide the parts of them that were considered ugly, deformed, or diseased. The last ugly law in America wasn't repealed until 1974. And while ugly laws themselves may no longer be enforced or on the books as law, the idea behind them still lives on, in the way that we expect ugly people to hide themselves, to make themselves small, to never take up too much space, or get too big for their britches. It's the reason why it does not matter what someone says to you in an argument on Twitter. If they are ugly, all you need to do is hit them with a "this you" in their own profile picture, and the entire timeline will descend on their head like a vulture spotting carcass. Because we all subscribe to the idea that ugly people cannot have audacity, and they must be nice. Otherwise, they will be promptly informed to shut their ugly asses up. The further you deviate from the beauty standard, the less beautiful you are, and the less access you have to what Deshaun Harrison refers to as desire capital in their book Belly of the Beast. Which is why, throughout this video, I'm going to use ugly to mean undesirable as it pertains to that beauty standard and who has access to the privileges and protections beauty comes with. So I'll be saying ugly and undesirable interchangeably, even when I'm talking about somebody who is beautiful in the face, but they're just fat, like Lizzo. Because to be fat is to be undesirable in a lookist society, which is why we have the same taboo around the word fat that we have around the word ugly.
Folks in the US also have a lot of other words for fat, right? When I was growing up, the only time I was called fat was as an insult. Otherwise, it was thick or big bone or husky or a number of other words that were used to describe me. So this aversion we have to it is because we know how directly associated this word is with an insult, right? With something bad. It feels like a slur to so many people. And so it's like it's difficult to hear that word, especially quote unquote launched at yourself or someone that you admire or that you think highly of, because it can feel like your initial response is to feel like this is an insult. And so what I tell people is, when I'm building an analysis around a group of people, or when I'm talking about an individual person as it relates to a body of people, I will use the word fat, and we will just have to get through that together. We will have to just move through that together, but that's the word I'm going to use because it's accurately describing who I'm talking about. But when I'm talking to an individual person, I always ask, how do you like to be referred to? And I refer to them in the ways that they choose to be referred to, because I do know that this discipline, fat studies, is only 2 decades old. It's a very new discipline, and while the academy does not determine everything about everything, it unfortunately, because it is an institution, it does in many ways determine how people perceive themselves, right? We so much about women, gender, sexuality studies and Black studies, et cetera, get passed down to folks who are outside the academy and become a big part of the general public's lexicon and vocabulary. And so it is still a very new discipline, and therefore people are still catching up with this idea that fatness is not something to run away from, and that it is a slur that can be reclaimed in the same ways that queer has been reclaimed or that nigga has been reclaimed.
The further away you are from meeting the beauty standard, the more you're expected to diet, pluck, pull, exercise, accessorize, purchase, and doll yourself up to meet it. Because we don't just have beauty standards, we have a beauty economy. And that beauty economy is built on the belief that it is our responsibility to make ourselves beautiful. Otherwise, we'll face the consequences of being ugly. It's remnant of something a piece of shit ex-boyfriend of mine used to say. Either be attractive or don't be unattractive.
Beauty in many ways is a buy-in, it's a performance, in the sense of when they say don't be attractive, unattractive is in do the work and the extra things to make yourself fall into we can't say too much. It's you might not be the prettiest, but be thin. You know what I mean? Make sure your hair do, make sure your nails fixed, make sure it's this recognition that we buy into it. And so because of that, and because everybody kind of recognizes that beauty is pain, beauty costs money, it's expensive to this and the next thing. Oh, well, it's the same thing when people be oh, she wasn't ugly, you were broke. Oh, they expect you to glow up once you get money. Because people see it as that, and everybody recognizes that they feel like it's, an optional thing. People dealing with the perils of being treated like they're ugly or whatever have you as a personal failure. If you cared enough, you know what you need to do to go be pretty.
Ironically enough, my ex wasn't no peach on the beach himself. But even him not being a peach on the beach spoke to his point, which was that if we aren't naturally beautiful or desirable, we have an obligation to make ourselves beautiful or as close to it as is attainable for us. It's that whole idea that you gotta pick a struggle, which was why he spent all of his time killing himself in the gym trying to achieve a body the powers that be never intended he have. And make no mistake about it, what he is saying is f***ed up, because one, it reinforces this unspoken belief that we are obligated to conform to the beauty standards and to chase beauty and desirability. And two, if we have an obligation to chase beauty and conform to the beauty standards, what that means is when we don't do this, it is a personal failure on our part, which is also why we look at insecurity as a personal failure rather than the result of a beauty politic that fails us collectively, but more on that later. Nevertheless, up as what he said is, while many of us would not say what he said or admit to ourselves that we think that way, I'm willing to bet that the way many of us live our lives and how we perceive ourselves, as well as how we perceive others, is evidence that we don't truly disagree with him. That's the reason we feel shame if we gain weight. It's why we worry that people will perceive us as letting ourselves go, that our bodies are proof of our failure. I'm reminded of a time when I was still a public defender with at least 60 or more cases, when a guy who worked at the front desk in my office took it upon himself one day as I was passing by to tell me I was fine, but how much finer I would be if I wasn't lazy. Because that's how you're perceived by people who share this quiet belief undergirding our beauty economy, that we're obligated to chase thinness, to try to be as close to the center of that beauty norm as possible. So my body must be proof of my personal failure, laziness. It's a testament to what Cecily Bowen reminds us in her book, Bad Fat Black Girl, that, quote, women who find themselves too far away from the center of beauty norms are often treated as if they've committed treason, our aesthetic a public-facing betrayal of our refusal to conform, our refusal to go to any lengths necessary to be valuable to society, specifically to its men. Although, even men are far from exempt from the pressure to chase beauty in our beauty economy. We all spend endless amounts of money on haircuts, hairstyles, makeup, clothes, gym, memberships, equipment, and diet tricks, hacks, and schemes trying to make ourselves beautiful. Because not only do we live in fear of how we'll be treated if we're ugly, we also expect a return on our investment because we know that beauty and desirability aren't just about satisfying our egos or receiving the validation of others. Beauty and desirability comes with material benefits.
Because Majesty, only Paolo can take this and give you
a princess. Better. Much better.
I'm a mess.
Oh yeah, what is quantum? What happened? Right.
That's where I come in. Oh, Lainey, no offense, but when was the last time you tweezed? What? Is in your eyebrows. Never. Gentlemen, may I present the new, not improved, but different, Lainey Boggs.
As Cecily Bowen put it in Bad Fat Black Girl, quote, we've all been touched by the idea that our bodies, if they're built right, are our salvation, our first line of defense, our key to entry. We are hyper aware that we could always be closer to the center. The material benefits are great, whilst the negative outcomes are too ugly.
SpongeBob?
Go. Run away like all the others. No one would want a friend as ugly as I am.
Sure they would. It makes them feel better about the way they look.
People have like a very real aversion to being considered ugly or even considering the idea of beauty being something that affords people a level of power and privilege over other folks, to the point where like everyone wants to be beautiful, even me, right? I wrote that entire chapter, and yet and still I still have my very clear moments with myself where I'm like, I want to be beautiful, not because it feels like something that feels important to me, but because I know that how I would be engaged in the world would look completely different, right? But that's also why I wrote about insecurities, because people have this idea that if you are able to acknowledge this truth, that then your personal feelings about yourself or your internalized like problems just go away. That like there's no way that you can feel insecure knowing what you know about fat phobia or knowing what you know about anti-Blackness or whatever. And it's like, well, actually, in fact, I think your insecurities are heightened because of how much you know, because you know that people engage you a particular way solely because of how you are perceived, solely because of how you look in the world. And it's difficult. It's not an easy thing to live with and to navigate.
But those material benefits are great. Beauty comes with greater access to better jobs, friends, romantic partners, wealth, you name it. But more than that, we treat pretty people better. We give them the benefit of the doubt. People are less likely to be convicted of crimes if they're beautiful, and they're more likely to be sentenced less harshly. We perceive beautiful people as more competent, as more deserving, period. More deserving of opportunity, sympathy, grace, second chances, resources, the benefit of the doubt, the list goes on. Think about it, because God don't like ugly. It's why Chris Brown can do whatever the he wants to whoever the he wants, and women will defend him like holding on to their firstborn child depends on it, and show up to meet and greets to be on his body like this. It's why Doja Cat can be in chats with white supremacists and tell all her fans to kick rocks and off. It's why Nicki Minaj can taunt and harass any and everybody with the vilest shit imaginable, including but not limited to mocking Megan Thee Stallion's dead mother and harassing her husband's rape victim. But Ari Lennox couldn't vent or be silly on socials without being bullied off the timeline. Chica couldn't Twitter rant about a loud baby pissing her off on the plane without having her ass handed to her by the entire black internet.
It's no longer about what she said. It's about desire and desirability. It's about who is and is not ugly, and therefore who deserves and does not deserve to be not only protected, but also held to account. Because it's not about accountability, it's about who burns at the stake.
Which is also why everybody and their mama in the entertainment industry has a lawsuit for all kind of wild shit that no one gives a about. But them same people want to nail Lizzo to the cross because she stood accused of being too overly familiar with her employees or internalizing fat phobia. But more on Lizzo later. Much darker than the previous examples is at the heart of how Ted Bundy could prey on and murder women for forever and a day before being caught, and once caught, develop a fan base of women who find him too attractive to give a flying about him being a serial killer of women, specifically of women like them.
Every time he turns around, I kind of get that feeling, oh no, you know, he's gonna get me next, you know.
But yet you're fascinated by him.
Very, very. Every night when I go to bed, I just, you know, I get very scared. I shut my door and lock him, you know.
I'm not afraid of him. He just doesn't look like the type to kill somebody. You try to imagine yourself in his place and to see how he's feeling, looking at the pillows with blood stains and everything, and if he really did it or not.
The trial has drawn women from as far away as Seattle, where Bundy is suspected of other sex murders. Why is this happening? According to one psychiatrist, it is a mixture of fear, intrigue, and in particular, sexual attraction.
And so, yes, I do think this is, in an underlying sense, a sexual attraction, using that word very broadly for the moment. But there is no question but what violence does quicken the pulse of many people, and certainly of young women.
The young women themselves aren't too sure what it is that attracts them to the trial. Are you a little scared when you look at him?
Yes, it scares me to be in the same room with him, but I know there's other people in there, so.
Why do you do it?
I don't know.
And Ted Bundy wasn't an anomaly. Remember Jeffrey Dahmer or Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker?
They are the women in black, admirers of Richard Ramirez. Why were you in the courtroom today?
I just wanted to see what he looked like. I think he's cute.
This woman, who gave her name only as Paige, calls herself a Satanist. She says Ramirez has written letters to her and that she's talked with him in jail.
Everyone makes him look so bad, you know, but I know that he's a nice person because I've met him, and I know.
He's convicted of 13 murders.
I know.
The material benefits of meeting the Eurocentric beauty standard is at the heart of why missing white women receive more media coverage than anyone else. It's why Natalie Holloway and even a child like JonBenet Ramsey's beauty was central to why their deaths was so tragic. It's the reason why whenever you watch a true crime documentary where the victim was a thin white woman, especially if she's blonde, they beat you over the head with how beautiful she was and how beautiful everyone thought she was, because that's central to the tragedy, that this beautiful person lost their life. That's a central factor in what makes their untimely demise seem so unfortunate. Can you even think of a single time the missing person or a victim of a crime receiving national attention was ugly?
Don't worry, I'll wait.
When you start to think about how this then plays out in society, it becomes dangerous, right? It becomes who gets the death penalty and who doesn't. It becomes who gets locked up and who doesn't. Fat black folks in particular, are disproportionately affected by criminality, are disproportionately criminalized rather than our white/thin counterparts.
What this beauty economy and the accompanying obligation to make ourselves as beautiful as possible, even when we don't naturally embody the beauty standards, means is that there are ways that some of us buy in. As Deshawn puts it in Belly of the Beast, there's a difference between pretty with a lowercase p versus pretty with a capital P. And that's going to be an important distinction in understanding where we fall in this hierarchy of beauty. In her 2017 essay, Being Pretty is a Privilege, but We Refuse to Acknowledge It, Janet Mock's thesis was simple. Pretty privilege is real, and we have an obligation to acknowledge that we benefit from it. Mock's commentary is particularly poignant because Janet Mock is a Black trans woman who is often perceived as cisgender. Cisgender simply means not trans for those who don't know. So in this context, what I am saying is that Janet Mock is a trans woman who people usually do not clock as trans. Mock's commentary is particularly poignant because although she is both non-white and trans, so she falls outside of the scope of who and what Eurocentric beauty standard says can be beautiful, and thus she'll never receive the kind of privilege and desire capital that a thin, blonde, cis white woman would have access to. She still can and does benefit from being pretty, depending on the room she's in. And this intersectionality is something she speaks directly to. Quote, "Pretty privilege is also conditional and is not often extended to women who are trans, Black and brown, disabled, older, and/or fat. Being curvy but not plus size, mixed but not all Black, trans but cis blending, and able-bodied gives me a different experience than many. I am a Black and Native Hawaiian trans woman who is often perceived as cis, with brown skin, curly hair, and hourglass size 8 shape. I have symmetrical facial features, a smooth, even complexion, and a white, straight, wide smile. For me, pretty privilege operates in a myriad of ways depending on the spaces I enter, who is in that space, and whether people already know that I am trans. I remember when I was a teenager and my classmates would praise me by saying, 'You don't even look like a boy anymore. You look so real,' or 'I can't even tell.' Backhanded compliments that still follow me when someone hears my story. It communicates our culture's misconception that equates cisness with attractiveness, and equates one's ability to be seen as cis with being seen as attractive, as real. I am a mixed Black woman who has benefited from pretty privilege in Black and people of color spaces, largely where I am not often read as trans, but I've also experienced being invisible in predominantly white and mainstream spaces. It has been a common experience to either be completely overlooked in favor of white women who are considered the beauty standard, or to have white folks or non-Black people of color point me out as an exception with comments like, 'You're pretty for a Black girl,' or 'You don't look fully Black.' The message: Blackness does not equate to attractiveness, and therefore, my mixedness puts me higher on the white cis beauty hierarchy than a Black woman with parents who are both Black. What Janet Mock was describing there is a kind of what I call situational pretty privilege, which Deshawn describes as the difference between pretty with a lowercase p versus a capital P. In Belly of the Beast, Deshawn explains, quote, "Prettiness with a capital P is about much more than one's appearance and requires one to reckon with what it means to experience structural advantages over someone who is ugly with a capital U. When I capitalize the P in pretty, the B in beauty, or the U in ugly, it is to name who does and does not have access to desired capital. That is to say, who owns or embodies more or less of the identities that grants one access, power, and resources. More to the point, pretty, beautiful, and ugly, all with lowercase letters, are subjective. They are not identities, but are rather determined by the individual. Rooted still in anti-Blackness, but are not structural identities. Pretty, beauty, and ugly with capital letters, however, are determined by the structures through which people are marginalized for their Blackness, their gender or genderlessness, and their bodies. Beauty standards, especially in the United States, are predicated on anti-Blackness, anti-fatness, anti-disfiguredness, cis-heterosexism, and ableism. As such, people who are Black, fat, disabled, and/or trans more generally do not have access to beauty with a capital B. However, as with all capital, one can embody identities that are valued in modern society and still also hold identities that are marginalized, which is why the term privilege is not quite specific enough and often does not go far enough. Desire is complex. Privilege insinuates that there is a possibility that you can opt out, and that if you don't feel pretty, then you can't possibly benefit from prettiness with a capital P, or suffer the violence of ugliness with a capital U. Desire and desirability politics and desire capital, however, suggest that one does not need to feel pretty with a lowercase p to be pretty with a capital P. One does not need to feel beautiful to be beautiful with a capital B. One does not need to feel ugly to be ugly with a capital U. How one benefits or suffers from the subjugation of particular people is not determined by their feelings. It is determined by the identities they embody.
There is a standard that people deviate from and that operates on a spectrum, right? So this set standard is what people call the European beauty standard. I don't like that naming because it implies that there is another beauty standard and there is not. not. There is this standard. And what happens is, how we describe it is discursive. So like the capital B beauty that I'm talking about is this standard. That is white, thin, cis, heterosexual, able-bodied, Christian. All of that goes under this standard of beauty. But discursively, which is just another way of saying what your sister said, which is that it is room dependent, who becomes beautiful in that space is about who exists as close as possible to that standard. Right? So in a room full of Black people, there are going to be Black folks in the space who are going to be considered beautiful, right? It is about who is as in close proximity as possible to this standard of beauty, right? So who is thin, who is light-skinned, who is cis, who is able-bodied, who fits these standards. We see that in a multitude of ways, right? We see that in the ways that shows like Pop the Balloon are done, right? We see that in the ways that shows like Love Island and Love is Blind and all these different shows that show you, that prove to you that Blackness discursively can be understood as beautiful, even if not capital B beautiful, depending on how close you are to this standard of beauty.
Consequently, people like Janet Mock, Laverne Cox, Jill Scott, Lizzo, Megan Thee Stallion, Doechii, Ari Lennox are all pretty with a lowercase p, meaning their beauty or desirability will be recognized in some rooms. There are benefits that comes with their pretty, but they will never have access to the kind of structural privilege and desire capital that Sydney Sweeney, Uma Thurman, Kirsten Dunst, Taylor Swift, or Sabrina Carpenter have access to, whether we personally find them attractive or not, because pretty with a lowercase p is subjective, but pretty with a capital P is structural, just like ugliness is structural, and that's what we're talking about here. That's why when I call anyone ugly in this video, what I am referring to is structurally, ugly with a capital U, and it's important that we name that. Bell Hooks explained that beauty is a politicized concept because, quote, it maintains imperialist, capitalist, white supremacist patriarchy. It's a system of oppression that gives us all something to aspire to.
The reality is that beauty that is not this capital B beauty is discursive. It is about what the room is made up of, and therefore who is determined to be the most beautiful and the least beautiful in that space, right? And then there are people who are in just about every room they enter are just never considered beautiful, are considered ugly. That is the way that this is broken down. That is the way that this is determined.
While many of us don't have access to pretty privilege with a capital P, we can and still do benefit from lookism. Because as I stated earlier, we can simultaneously embody identities that are marginalized and identities that are privileged. And it is necessary that we acknowledge where we are benefited by lookism and not use where we are marginalized in other ways to obfuscate from the reality of how our looks provides us benefits. This is intersectionality.
For folks who then say, well, you know, I grew up fat or whatever, my response to them is always two things. One, so then you should understand the direct impact of that level of violence because you grew up with that experience. But two, we're not talking about how you grew up. We're talking about what you experience now, right? You can go talk to a therapist about your trauma from your childhood. That's not relevant to this conversation about how you experience the world now, how the world sees you now. And I recognize the fact that trauma can, in so many ways, warp our perception of ourselves. We don't really understand or really know or really see how the world sees us because of how deeply our trauma informs how we see ourselves. And if the world is responding to you in this particular way all the time, always, there has to be a level of reckoning within yourself that acknowledges that you are seen and engaged in a very different way than you once were, and therefore you are seen and engaged in a very different way than I am or than we are. And that has to be acknowledged to be able to fully, I hate this word, but I won't use that word, to be fully an accomplice to who you claim to advocate for or whatever. But also it means that you then have to acknowledge the ways that your life in this moment is overdetermined by how you look. And that then also means that you have to acknowledge that can change in the blink of an eye. And I think people have a really hard time with that aspect of this. It's like people are working overtime to maintain this level of beauty, whether they acknowledge it as that or not, because they know that the moment it changes, everything about how they are perceived in the world changes, and therefore everything about how their life is structured is changed. And that becomes a really, really, really hard thing to sit with for folks, because whether they like it or not, whether they admit it or not, whether they want to acknowledge it or not, they know that at the heart of how they are able to live, how their livelihood is constructed, is based on their beauty. And it's based on being understood as beautiful over and against those people over there, the others, those who are presented outside of any sort of ability to be beautiful, lowercase or uppercase.
As Janet Mock asserted, quote, "We should recognize our positionality across all of our intersections and experiences. I am a Black trans woman who was invited into spaces largely because of how I present, but for so long I tried to evade the fact that people saw me as pretty or attractive. And I learned quickly to adapt and play the modesty game, because to acknowledge that you are pretty is conceited, and to be conceited is to be unlikable. Women have been trained to minimize their greatness in an effort to be more likable. We learn that when we are complimented, especially about our looks, we must dismiss the compliment, feign self-deprecation and modesty, undermine our looks, and pretend we did absolutely nothing to contribute to them. I learned to counter a compliment by highlighting a flaw, pointing out something I didn't like about myself, perhaps a blemish on my forehead, or the fact that my symmetry is contoured. But self-deprecation and dismissals will not save us from the fact that we exist in a lookist culture that equates a woman's attractiveness to her worth. It's problematic when a pretty person denies they're pretty, and pretty people must take ownership of the fact that they get special treatment. We do ourselves a disservice by saying looks don't matter, because looks do matter. It's unbecoming to acknowledge your attractiveness, so it creates a silence around pretty privilege that only elevates the competitiveness and divisiveness between women who are told we must compare, compete, and measure up in a lookist culture. People with privilege do not want to discuss their privilege, whether it's privilege derived from whiteness, straightness, cisness, but we must acknowledge our privilege if we are to dismantle these systems and hierarchies. We have to be honest, and I'll start with myself. I am pretty and I benefit from my looks. The silence around pretty privilege and lookism is very real and very much a critical part of the problem. We're not supposed to acknowledge our own beauty or the benefit it provides. In the same way, we're not supposed to acknowledge who is ugly and how they're treated because they're ugly. We're meant to be passive beneficiaries of pretty privilege, just as ugly people are meant to suffer in silence. In Bad Fat Black Girls, Cecily Bowen attributes this expectation that only select people are supposed to have access to pretty privilege and that we're supposed to be passive beneficiaries to one of the reasons people hate and shame people who flaunt their assets and or get plastic surgery. She said this: "Only certain people are meant to have access to beauty, and those few who do should be humble and demure about it. We love that women have fat asses, but we hate when they wear thongs or shake their asses directly into cameras for everyone to see. Women shouldn't know and harness the power of their beauty. They should passively allow the privileges to be bestowed upon them by others." Which is precisely the reason why prior to going solo and doing the Buss It Challenge, men and women alike were doing nothing but sexualizing Chloe, lusting over her body and calling for her to go solo and break out from she and her sister's more wholesome image. But the minute she did and made it clear that she also knew she was fine as that her ass was fat, that her face was beautiful and her talents were abundant, all of a sudden, women and men of all ages started crawling out of their skin to shame and criticize her relentlessly. Cecily continued, "Plastic surgery or even wearing butt pads not only threatens the exclusivity of beauty, but also grants women too much control over their beauty. Issues of access not included. When you can go buy a snatch waist and a fat ass, it democratizes the benefits of having a nice body, which was never how a sexist system was meant to work." Remember the Hunchback of Notre Dame example from earlier? Frollo discriminated against Quasimodo because in Frollo's eyes, Quasimodo's disability not only made him ugly, but it was a moral failure because God is responsible for beautiful things, and thus his ugliness was proof he was not of God.
And when he realizes the woman was protecting her child, a deformed baby, Frollo prepares to drown it in a well. Frollo sees deformity as a moral failing. And what do you do about moral failings? Well, according to him, you must punish it, or just to be quick, you have it erased.
Unlike Unlike Quasimodo, however, Frollo thought Esmeralda was beautiful. She was too beautiful, actually. So beautiful that it created an issue of morality in Frollo's eyes as well, where she crossed over from being beautiful and became a temptress, an agent of sin, ushering him towards hell.
In many ways, Hellfire is one of Disney's best renditions. It's a prayer, a confession, and a threat. Frollo uses this song to justify his lust. Instead of seeing it as a human impulse, he sees it as a sin. Not just immoral, but impure, degrading, and offensive to God. And because he believes himself to be a righteous man, a man of God, as he calls himself, he can't accept that those lustful desires are coming from within him. So he shifts the blame. In his mind, Esmeralda becomes the source of his lust, not its object. He convinces himself that she is a temptress, an agent of the devil who has bewitched him, corrupted his moral purity, and tried to drag his soul to hell. He frames his obsession with Esmeralda as a spiritual battle, as though he's being tested by God. He tells himself that he is still holy, still righteous, and that the real sin is Esmeralda's beauty, her presence, her refusal to submit. Frollo kneels in front of flames, surrounded by hooded figures, faceless judges, imploring him to accept mea culpa, which means that he should acknowledge his faults. But he doesn't. Then he demands that God either deliver her to him or condemn her to hell.
Frollo might feel like an extreme example of how we act on the imaginary connections we make between morality and beauty, but I think it's an apt one. Frollo associates morality with beauty, which doesn't only compel him to punish ugliness as a moral failing, but also to punish being too beautiful. This is not dissimilar from the way we attach morality to being passively beautiful and having a great natural body, which leads us to behave similarly to Frollo. We punish ugly people because we see it as their personal failure for not buying in and doing what they can to make sure they're not unattractive. But we also punish those who we think do too much to be beautiful or to acknowledge their beauty, which is why we teach people it's not attractive to acknowledge their own looks, and we shame, degrade, and hypersexualize women we find especially attractive, especially those who get breast implants or BBLs, and we ascribe negative things to them to justify our attraction. Just like Frollo was calling Esmeralda every kind of succubus, seductress, whore, that's exactly how y'all be accusing every bad bitch of being a money-hungry gold digger who ain't never worked for shit she had a day in her life, especially if y'all perceive her as buying into her bad bitch status. But here's the thing. Even with the ability to buy into beauty, to move ourselves closer to the center of the beauty norms, even buying in will never be accessible for many people. Someone like Quasimodo could never buy in.
That's a personal failure. If you cared enough, you know what you need to do to go be pretty.
Yeah, exactly. That is quite literally what they mean, right? Even though we know that not everyone is going to be thin or muscular no matter what they do, right? Whether they work out, they quote unquote eat right, like none of that is a guarantee for so many people, and so many people cannot do some of these things due to various disabilities, right? Like that is just true. And Black people, our bodies they're not made the same way that white European people's bodies are. And yet so much about what we are taught to aspire to is to look like that, look like them. And we then internalize that and then place that responsibility, that expectation on other Black folks around us. And that is what they mean by, if you don't like it, then you can change it. But the reality is, no, you cannot. You will never be European. You will never have that experience. But beyond that, the other part of the conversation that happens is people likening this critique to, or this analysis rather, to that of a person who is an incel. That becomes frustrating for me because this analysis is not saying that I have a right to have sex with anybody that I want to have sex with. That's what incels are doing. This analysis is, there is a blatant level of discrepancy and violence, oppression that happens when you are a person who is ugly. And one of the ways that manifests is in whether or not people desire you in and outside of sex, right? So it's not even just about sex, desire. And the reason why I wrote that chapter in the book is because I really wanted people to know that desire undergirds everything about the world in which we live. So it's not just about whether or not people are wanting to have sex with you. It is also about, and to be clear, anybody who experiences sexual attraction is justified in expressing that they are interested in having sex. They're not justified in expressing that they have a right to sex from anybody. Like, that's not the same. And I think that always gets conflated, and it's really frustrating. But even beyond sex, desire plays a significant role in everything about how the world engages us. It determines who is employed. It determines who is housed. It determines who is making money. It determines who has path to friendship even, right? It determines so much about how we engage, how we're engaged in the world and how people respond to us in the world, that you have to be almost purposely ignoring these realities to be able to jump to those types of conclusions.
Nevertheless, even though racism, ableism, fat phobia, queer phobia, colorism, featureism are often factors in why a person isn't considered beautiful or is a victim of negative lookism, that does not mean we can simply dismiss lookism as merely byproducts of these phenomenons. And it's really important that I drive this point home. While racism, sexism, and all the other isms and phobias can and often do intersect with lookism, they do not have to. And we should understand lookism as its own distinct form of discrimination that can affect even otherwise privileged people. It's important that we understand lookism as its own distinct kind of discrimination for the same reason that it's important that we see ugly people as their own social group, in the same way that we recognize young people or old people or black people or white people as their own social groups with their own unique interests and experiences. In his paper, Lookism is an Epistemic Injustice, Thomas J. Spiegel explains that if lookism weren't a distinct kind of discrimination, or if ugly people weren't their own social group, that would mean, quote, their experiences are merely individual or subjective anomalies rather than recurring patterns of look-based oppression. But we know that's not true. Ugly people are routinely discriminated against in many ways that are researched and quantified. Spiegel explained further, quote, lookism is also systemic in that lookism is at work in multiple aspects of social life. People have to carry their looks throughout virtually all areas of their life. For example, in the area of employment, ugliness can prevent one from getting certain positions in a way that is analogous to how race often favorably or unfavorably influences employment opportunities. But just in the case of race, the discrimination experience is not individual, but part of a larger system. Moreover, Spiegel explains that despite the falsehood that beauty is an eye of the beholder, it is important to state that lookism is not merely a subjective matter. Contrary to popular belief, research has shown that beauty and ugliness are not entirely subjective. There is an astonishingly high agreement on who is attractive and who is not. Spiegel explains that while we think our taste, who we find beautiful and who we find ugly, is a subjective individual matter, our taste is socio-culturally determined. We do, in fact, have some collective understandings of beauty and ugliness that makes whether a person is beautiful or ugly with a capital B and a capital U not dependent on whether you or I or the next find them attractive. This might sound a little confusing, but I think we know exactly how this functions in real life. Think about when and why we say someone is attractive but we're not attracted to them. Because while they're not our personal cup of tea, we are still aware that they are still attractive within our cultural understandings of beauty. We know that while we may not be attracted to them, the larger community would find them attractive. For example, Kirsten Dunst, Uma Thurman, Katherine Heigl are all examples of people who are going to be considered beautiful in the eyes of society. Capital B, structurally beautiful, whether you or even they think they're beautiful. Another example of our awareness of how our collective understanding of beauty and ugly renders beauty and ugliness not dependent on our personal individual opinions. When we ourselves may not necessarily find a person ugly, but we still know they're ugly to the masses because we know good and well exactly who is considered beautiful and who is not. Think about when your friends like somebody that they too ashamed to show you because they're attracted to them, but they know that other people will think they're ugly. And that matters to people. We should understand that not only are beautiful people and ugly people distinct social groups with specific unique experiences, people can be beautiful and receive the benefits of beauty while still being a member of other oppressed or marginalized social groups.
You with the six-pack, you're in. You with the Ben Affleck chin and the Matt Damon everything else, you're in. In your dreams.
Oh, come on, I've had a rough day.
This is a nightclub, not a John F. Kennedy cabinet meeting.
In the gay community, there is a term called bears, which in recent years has really been gentrified, for lack of a better word, where it used to be about fat men who are hairy having like a sort of subgroup within the community, and now it has become about muscle bears only, which is just muscular hairy men who don't have abs. Very annoying. But the point of what I'm naming here is that sometimes they will have like
muscular.
Right. Sometimes
I call
they'll
it
have
like muscular.
I love that actually. Sometimes they'll have like parties for bears or quote unquote chubs or quote unquote cubs. Cubs are just folks who are not as big and who are not hairy, but who are like still larger. These spaces are, particularly when they are black, I'm not even talking about the whites at this point. These spaces are deeply removed from this standard of beauty. But so then what happens in this space is that the chasers, the chubby chasers, get prioritized in this space by the chubs, the cubs, the bears, who are very deeply interested in being desired by people who do not look like them, right? By people who they understand to have a level of power and a level of beauty that they cannot obtain. Then it is, again, the light skin, the light-skinned, bearded, fat person who may be a little bit more solid than the rest in the room, or who may be a little smaller than the folks in the rest of the room, who are then prioritized behind the chaser, right? And the chaser is never understood to be another chub in the room. The chaser is always understood to be the thinnest person in the room. That is what that looks like.
In the same way, people can be ugly and experience all the discrimination ugly people face while still being a member of other privileged social groups. For example, Naomi Campbell is beautiful and will still benefit from lookism despite being black and dark-skinned. The same goes for Janet Mock despite being a black trans woman, while Lena Dunham and Amy Schumer, despite being white women, once even blonde, will still experience the world as ugly people, which is something they both know and frequently incorporate in their work. But we'll talk about that later when we discuss Lena Dunham more in depth. The point is this: you know good and well who people think are beautiful and who people think are ugly. We know exactly what other motherfuckers are gonna say about any given person's appearance and why. So don't give me that beauty is in the eye of the beholder shit, because we cannot have a real discussion about the treatment of ugly people if you sit up here pretending ugly people are mythical creatures like unicorns that don't really exist. Don't piss me off. We have such a cone of silence around lookism, beauty, and the politics of ugliness that every time I raise my burning desire to make this video addressing the plight of ugliness to my friends, all of said no for one reason.
We have no problem calling out pretty privilege and exactly who we believe benefits from it. But when the inverse happens all of a fucking sudden, we don't feel like we could name that. You know what I mean? And what it ultimately does is just puts their experiences it's a societal gaslighting. Like, they are walking through the world knowing that because that I am perceived as ugly in this society, that this is how people experience me, this is how I'm treated, this is how I experience the dating market, the job market, XYZ. But anytime it's there can be no awareness of it, there can be no actual like discussion of it or addressing of it, because it's a problem everybody want to put in silence, like, because they want to be polite. Ironically enough, because it's considered unattractive, it's unattractive, like it will be unbecoming and reflect poorly on you to acknowledge somebody else as ugly or whatever have you. So it's funny, it's an upholding of the same beauty politic.
You need an ugly nigga to speak on this though, because you ain't ugly though.
What is underlying there?
You have shrines to your fineness online. Yes, no. You.
Oh, yeah. I thought you were saying I made it. I thought you were saying
shrines. Niggas have your pictures and like literally do offerings to them on Reddit and 4chan blood.
And unfortunately, he ain't lie. I have reported many a nasty Reddit and message board collected my every picture on the beach.
Jesus Christ.
Foreign thought process is one reason why we never hear anyone advocating for the plight of ugly people, but it's not the main reason. Despite it being a statistically supported fact that ugly people are discriminated against in a million different ways, very rarely do we see anyone step forward and claim to be an ugly person on the receiving end of that discrimination. And the reason why is simple. No one wants to be ugly. The simple fact that no one wants to be ugly
ugly, and no one wants to call anyone ugly unless they're talking shit on social media and we don't like them. Then it's immediately
Shut up, shut your ugly old time ancient ass up.
Otherwise, no one wanting to be ugly is precisely what usually keeps ugly people from being able to form a strong social group that advocates against lookism. A rare example of ugly people forming a strong social group to advocate against lookism is the World Association of Ugly People, aka the Ugly Club. The organization was created in 1879 in Italy for the purposes of fighting lookism in the workplace, as well as just generally increasing awareness around the plight of ugly people in a lookist world. One of the most revolutionary aspects of this group is their effort to destigmatize ugliness, which is reflected in the group's existence as well as its crest, which reads, quote, "Ugliness is a virtue, beauty is slavery." And their motto is, "A person is what he is and not what he looks like." The World Association of Ugly People boasts 25 chapters across the world, more than 3,000 members, and they host an annual festival called the Festival of Ugly People, as well as they erected a monument to ugly people in the birthplace of their organization. And here's some photos of members of the Ugly Club at their annual festival in 2016. The Ugly Club is an amazing example of people recognizing their own ugliness in order to destigmatize ugliness and challenge lookism. However, the Ugly Club is an anomaly. In addition to people's underlying belief that we are obligated to be attractive or not be unattractive, the reason why people don't take lookism as serious as other forms of discrimination is because while there are women fighting against sexism, Black people fighting against racism, people with disabilities fighting against ableism, there are very few people willing to recognize themselves as ugly for obvious reasons. And those that are gaslighted and told they're not ugly and that they aren't experiencing whatever they're experiencing because they're ugly, which is meant to be polite. But by gaslighting ugly people, you just prevent them from being able to see themselves as a part of a larger group that can fight against shared experiences of oppression. We as Black people, it helps us to the fact that we know racism is a thing that can be named. We know we are experiencing racism. We have a community of other people who will affirm that is quite literally necessary and helpful to our emotional, psychological well-being of moving through life. We know, okay, I'm not tripping. That ain't even about me. It's because I'm Black. We know what's happening there. So for people who are going through life experiencing a world that is radically different than them, treats them like shit because they don't find it desirable, and to have people constantly tell them that that's not what's happening creates a confusion. It's an epistemic injustice that is being experienced there. There's power that comes from being able to recognize yourself as part of a group and taking pride in that identity. You're better able to destigmatize the identity and better cope with the cons of being a part of that group, which is why when SpongeBob starts spiraling about being ugly, Patrick doesn't tell him he's not ugly. He tells him to be proud of being ugly.
Say it. Say it.
I can't.
SpongeBob, you're never gonna feel better till you get this thing off your chest.
I know, Patrick.
Say it. Say it.
I'm ugly.
You're ugly and what?
Square?
No, proud.
I'm ugly and I'm proud.
Good. Say it louder.
I'm ugly and I'm proud.
Louder.
I'm ugly and I'm proud.
Louder.
I'm ugly and I'm proud.
But few people have friends like Patrick. Instead, they've got folk who gaslight them and just leave them feeling confused. An example that comes to mind is this YouTube video where a guy who has spent his entire life as an ugly person and being treated as such made a video stating plainly that he is ugly. That is literally what he named it, and that people treat him like shit and he's lonely and he is sad as a result. Would you believe that 25 million people watched that video and 170,000 lying ass got in the comment section to gaslight this boy, talking about, oh, you're not ugly, you're cute, and a whole bunch of bullshit, or all kind of implications that he just needed a different hairstyle or a makeover or something. You see that buying in shit. But they were saying all of this because they were trying to be kind, because we all recognize that in our world, being ugly is a bad thing. But the thing is this: he knows how shitty it is to be ugly in our lookist ass society because he lives it. And that's why he was telling us about it. And invalidating him isn't a kindness. It's gaslighting that causes a person to doubt their very real lived experience and prevent them from advocating against the discrimination they face because you're ultimately denying that discrimination happened. Think about it.
If an ugly person says to you, this is my negative experience because I'm ugly in our world, and you reflexively go, oh, you're not ugly, you are denying that their experience is what it is and what they know it to be. And that's a special kind of injustice. It's what's called an epistemic injustice that we're going to get into later. Another example comes to us from YouTube as well, a video by a creator called Stefco.
That's what started off the discussion about pretty privilege. She was just like, I don't have pretty privilege. And I think what was most indicative of what you're talking about is the fact that she made that video, came in there, did the whole thing, She had a very realist and pragmatic approach to talking about pretty privilege, and saying that she don't have it. And then it kind of proved itself because her viewership has been down ever since. I mean, so like really didn't stick around and they didn't care about it. And it kind of maybe speaks to maybe ugliness is only consumable when performed in a pain and an afflictive way. Like you only want to see ugly people if they in pain.
We covet beauty so much and see not being beautiful as such a hardship, because it is in our looking society that even being or receiving yourself as average looking will get a similar response the two previous creators got. And I know that because when Kimberly Foster dared to call herself average looking, something I'm sure she determined based on her lived experience, everybody and their mama hopped out to tell her, no, you're beautiful, and to criticize her for being insecure or speaking about herself negatively.
I mean, most people are average looking, regular looking. Ooh, people have come at me with this years ago on Twitter when I said, I'm just a regular looking woman, like I'm average. And then somebody, you know, with kind of a platform was like, why would you say that about yourself? Why would you say anything less than you are gorgeous? And I'm like, me saying that I occupy toward the median, you know, maybe a little bit above the median in physical attractiveness is not me saying I am not worthy of literally everything in the world that I desire, because I believe that. I do believe that. I definitely have a sense of entitlement about some stuff. That's not me saying that I deserve to be treated poorly and I'm not going to get what I want out of life and I'm going to only settle for ain't shit and, you know, like, no. It's an understanding of the way that the world works, right? The same way I say I'm not the richest person in the world, not the most attractive person in the world. It's just like an understanding of reality. And I actually think that a refusal to accept that average or regular is not the worst thing in the world to be keeps many of us in bondage. It keeps us in a chokehold. Because like, if ugly is the very worst thing that you can be, and regular is like one step above ugly, then you're always gonna be clawing. Oh, I gotta make sure that, and it's like, no, I'm good. I'm okay. It is what it is.
All of these creators being gaslit when they tried to discuss their experiences with lookism or their own relationship to beauty is an example of a kind of epistemic injustice we'll get into in the next chapter. But for now, I'm using these examples to make the point that when an ugly person tries to share their negative experiences as an ugly person, instead of telling them they're not ugly and thus they're delusional or wrong in their assessment of their life and how they know they're perceived and treated, we should instead attack and challenge the lookist society that okays casual and regular discrimination against ugliness. That actually tackles the problem. Gaslighting ugly people about what they're experiencing actually just upholds the system because it prevents it from being challenged by the people most harmed by it. We all know good and well when people think a motherfucker ugly, and we absolutely do not need to just volunteer that information where it's not pertinent or say it just to say it, especially to those people. But when those people themselves discuss it, truly engage the experience they're sharing and critique the system that oppresses them.
I think that like if a person is using language that very clearly indicates that they have a level of understanding of like what desire is, what lookism is, etc., I don't think that there's anything wrong with affirming like what this person is talking about. If someone is using language that very clearly doesn't indicate that they like have a deep understanding of what they're talking about, but they are clear on their experience, my response has always been, and this is my response really to anyone, to talk to them about structural shit, right? Like my response is, look, I absolutely hear you, and the way that the world sees you, what you were describing, that is absolutely true. The world sees you as this way. The world engages you in this way because of this, and this. So that way, what is internalized is that there is a structural problem that is determining how they are being engaged. It is not an individual issue, because folks who are feeling the effects of desirability, who are feeling the effects of the libido economy, who are feeling the effects of lookism or whatever it is that you want to use, have already deeply internalized the feelings that come with that experience. And so my investment is in acknowledging that ugliness is a structural thing, that it is a structural identity, or that rather it is an identity that is structured by so much about how the rest of the world works.
But I say all this to say, the unwillingness to be ugly is why we don't have advocates to make us take lookism seriously, which is necessary in a society that thinks any discrimination that isn't illegal is socially acceptable.
Mexican?
What? That's discrimination. It's illegal. We could have her arrested.
It's her baby. She can do whatever the hell she wants to. We toss those birth mothers aside because of their appearance.
Well, that's different. Because I read the Constitution and it does not protect ugly people.
That was a clip from Desperate Housewives, where Gabrielle Solis, played by Eva Longoria, was angry that a blonde white woman whose baby she wanted to adopt specifically because she was pretty rejected their application because they were Mexican, and she's outraged, prompting her husband to point out what she sees as hypocrisy on her part for being outraged because they had chosen not to adopt a bunch of other women's babies because those women were ugly and they didn't want an ugly baby. To which she retorts that one of those kinds of discrimination is legal and the other is not. Therefore, one is fine and the other is not. The comment is played for laughs, but the sentiment is how she and most people really feel, as well as it's another example of a real way ugly people are discriminated against in real life that probably never crossed our minds. Adoptions. There are children who do not get homes because either they or their parents are ugly. It's not just worth noting who Gabrielle considered beautiful and why, the thin blonde white woman. We also need to emphasize the fact alone that not having an ugly baby was just as, if not more important to her than having a healthy baby in the first place, which is unfortunately some real shit. All people talk about is how cute their children gonna be, which partner would make the cutest babies, because we are obsessed with beauty and we make critical life decisions based on beauty and desire, then delude others into believing they're not experiencing a luckless world that we know we are quietly but actively and aggressively participating in. Which brings us to why lookism is an epistemic injustice. Listen up closely, because I think this is one of the most important parts of this discussion, and I think it's the most academic it's going to get, so lock in. There are a million reasons why lookism is a problem in our society, but for ugly people, lookism is what's called an epistemic injustice. So, what's an epistemic injustice? Epistemic injustice is a term coined by Miranda Fisher, and she defined it as, quote, the injustice done to a person in their capacity as a knower. I think an easier way to describe epistemic injustice is as a distinct kind of injustice where people are not given adequate credit for their claims, knowledge, and experiences. Fisher said that there are two distinct kinds of epistemic injustice: testimonial injustice and hermeneutical injustice. Testimonial injustice refers to when people are ignored, dismissed, not believed, or not seen as credible due to their identity or membership to a particular group. A prevalent example of this in our society is the way women are dismissed when we come forward with abuse simply because we're women, which is specifically why things like #BelieveWomen and the Me Too movement even exist, to combat a common yet pervasive kind of testimonial injustice women experience. More specific examples of testimonial injustice that also illustrate how lookism is a distinct form of discrimination, because although women in general experience testimonial injustice whenever they come forward about abuse, what Tarana Burke and Quantasia Sharpton experienced was specific to lookism. Tarana Burke, the founder of the Me Too movement and a survivor of sexual violence, had countless people completely discount that she was ever sexually abused and the importance of her work at all, based solely on the fact that they thought she was too undesirable to be sexually abused. And Quantasia Sharpton was a woman who sued Usher for giving her herpes, only to have the entire public decide she was lying solely because they refused to believe Usher had sex with her altogether because she's fat. Hermeneutical injustice occurs when someone's experiences are not well understood by themselves or others because these experiences do not fit any concepts known to them or others due to the historic exclusion of some groups of people from activities, such as scholarship and journalism, that shape the language people use to make sense of their experiences. An easier way to understand this, quote, Hermeneutical injustice makes someone less able to interpret their own life.
Growing up being perceived as the ugly friend really plays a role when it comes to character development, and I just feel like if you didn't grow up being considered ugly, you don't go through life how we go through life. I feel like middle school is like the year that everyone goes through their awkward phase, and I felt like the ugly duckling in middle school. But I was just like, okay, it is what it is. High school was when things were actually happening. My friends were dating, and I wasn't dating. I didn't have my first kiss. All of my friends were having their first kiss, losing their virginity, and like actually having like guys to talk to. And I just felt like I was the odd one out. Guys would be like, hey, my friend's trying to talk to you, and the friend's not even trying to freaking talk to me. Like, do you know how badly that hurts? That's literally trauma. You grow up with that trauma thinking like, oh, guys aren't taking you seriously. Like they only view you as ugly and you're just there for entertainment, or you're there as a joke.
Can we talk about how we are not the woman that's like ever approached in the friend group? More specifically, how you internalize it, how you deal with it. You know, because it's hard for me to believe that I'm the pretty girl when I'm out and men don't approach me. I tell you guys all the time that like I get the most attention from guys on the internet, not out in public. I for the most part, I'm never approached, just to keep it a buck. Or I'm approached by super older guys, like 50 and up. Nobody in my age range. And I don't care how many times my friends tell me I'm pretty, people at church tell me I'm pretty. When it's all said and done and I'm in a room with them, I'm never seen.
Anybody who's ever been in that position before knows what that's like. In fact, there was a social media trend a couple months ago. People basically took that and acted out what it was like when a person who is interested in one person in the group, specifically when it's men who are interested in one woman in the group, how they speak one way to the person they're interested in and completely just do not even acknowledge the other people in the group. Or when they don't find the other person in the group physically attractive, they might just go ahead and full on be rude to that person. You know, I remembered that trend, and so whenever this young woman put out her video, of course my question was, why are we acting like this is a big deal?
Okay, so really quickly, my "this is a big deal" comment is in relation to some of the backlash that I saw coming from this video after it was posted on Instagram. When I was going through the Instagram comments, I was getting increasingly angry because it was reminding me of things that I've heard said to me before, just by people who didn't get it, who were acting like, you know, this was something that they were just confused by and thought was kind of a ridiculous thing to be worried about.
I definitely sympathize with the original poster, who was essentially talking about going out in her group of friends and feeling ignored, or saying like everyone tells you how amazing and beautiful you are, but it hasn't translated to romantic interests, at least in public, like people approaching you. And it is a total mind. It's like, am I not beautiful enough for people to want to feel attracted to me in that way? And I still don't have a complete answer to how to handle that. All I can say is, like, for me, I think of it in terms of societal beauty and fat phobia and stuff. I know I live in this fat, dark-skinned body, and I know a lot of men care more about what their homeboys think or the next man thinks. And so a lot of them are more comfortable approaching me online or like behind closed doors or whatever.
Ugly people's experience with lookism is a perfect example of both kinds of epistemic injustice, testimonial and hermeneutical. But I have just the perfect case study to demonstrate it all. It's time to talk about Lena Dunham. Most people don't want to be identified as ugly, so that stops them from naming their experiences, the discrimination they face as a result of lookism. But there are those ugly people who know that they are perceived as ugly and know that they are being discriminated against because they are ugly, and society gaslights the out of them in either one of two ways or both of two ways. When an ugly person says that something is happening to them because they're ugly, either people refuse to accept that as the reason for their experience, or they're told they're not ugly. Thomas J. Spiegel said, quote, "There are cases in which an ugly person who knows they are ugly and knows she is being discriminated against based on their looks is told that she is not ugly. This can be motivated by nothing but good intentions on the side of the person discounting the ugly person's experience. Since we know that being ugly is considered an undesirable trait, it seems that good manners command, some may think, to deny the ugly person's ugliness, despite the fact that the person denying it might secretly be cognizant of the the fact that the ugly person is in fact unattractive. Lena Dunham is the perfect example of this. And I think about it all the time. In fact, recently I was rewatching Lena Dunham's 2012 HBO drama, Girls. And I was thinking to myself, as I always do whenever I watch it, just how much more celebrated and remembered both this show and Lena Dunham would be if people did not think she was ugly or fat. Or at the very least, the discussion would be way different. And I think it's worth saying that I, Olay, did not and do not think Lena Dunham's Girls body was fat nor undesirable. That is just not something anyone will ever convince me of, especially not in the society I come from. We would have called like y'all solid in the bombers. Nevertheless, we are talking structural ugly, structural undesirability. And in the white world that Lena Dunham's body navigates, she's perceived both as fat and ugly, which is something Girls explores frequently through Lena's character Hannah, and the perception and vocal criticism from both her friends and love interests. Yet, Hannah's body is often on display, as Hannah is very comfortable nude, even with the admitted awareness of being perceived as ugly and fat and feeling the negative effects of it. And that, to me, is a little bit revolutionary, destigmatizing ugliness and undesirability, basically saying to the audience that I can be ugly or fat to you, and maybe even to me, and that literally does not matter. I am still the main character in my own life story and this show. I'm still okay with and in my own body. I can be and am still desired and have desires of my own, but that is just not how it was received. Far from it. In fact, when Girls was on the air, 24-year-old Lena Dunham's decision to star in her own show that she created and to regularly feature her nude body didn't just draw criticism, it brought out the pitchforks, not from people who took issue with nudity in general. It's an HBO show. Nudity is the name of the game. It brought out the pitchforks from people who were enraged that she would dare show that body nude. People across the internet and real publications published relentless attacks on Lena Dunham's body about how disgusting she was, how ugly and fat she was, how she needed to die, how offensive it was that she would show her body on screen or write unbelievable storylines where men liked her. Joan Rivers, who y'all never gave the hate y'all gave Wendy Williams, which is also proof of the phenomenon we're discussing here, had the nerve to say that Lena Dunham was committing crimes against nudity by showing her body on television. Joan Rivers fixed her mouth to say that people watch Girls with their hands over their eyes because Lena Dunham is the first fat girl naked on television, and that Girls was encouraging people to stay fat and get diabetes.
Hell no, man.
In one episode, one of my favorite episodes in the series actually, Lena Dunham's character Hannah becomes romantically involved with an older, good-looking doctor with money, played by Patrick Wilson, and the public rioted. Slate published a real-life article with all kind of male journalists fighting to the death to insist that the episode was basically sci-fi because she was too ugly to pull that man and that it was unbelievable he'd be with her. These people were angry because they don't think Lena Dunham is beautiful and that the type of body she has should be hidden in shame, that Lena Dunham should not feel comfortable showing that body on screen. She didn't get the credit she deserved as a 24-year-old who created and starred in her own HBO successful hit show because people were too busy being outraged by her audacity to not only make herself the protagonist, but a protagonist who's not only comfortable with nudity, but makes her body being pleasured and desired a regular occurrence in the show. People were angry because they don't think ugly people were meant to be seen, let alone centered and celebrated, and they hated her for it. And they made sure she knew it, which is why the plight of Lena Dunham lives in my mind rent-free. Because every time I see Lena Dunham mentioned, it's usually because people are spewing a unique amount of vitriol her way based on things that often aren't even true. And lookism is a core reason why. For example, whenever, and I do mean whenever, Lena Dunham is mentioned, you are going to see a million people commenting some variation of, didn't she molest her baby sister and write about it? Whole time that is not true at all. In Lena Dunham's memoir, Not That Kind of Girl, she told a story about when she was 7 years old and she asked her mother if her little sister's vagina looked like hers, and her mother said, I guess so, just smaller. But 7-year-old Lena decided to see for herself and immediately discovered that her sister had shoved a bunch of pebbles in her vagina. So Lena screamed, her sister laughed, and their mother ran over and removed the pebbles. That is what happened. That is what Lena wrote. Weird story, I'll give you that, but she did not sexually abuse or molest anyone, not according to her sister, her mother, or many experts. So, how then did everyone and their mama come to believe that Lena Dunham told us she molested her sister? A conservative blog published a headline that reads, Lena Dunham describes sexually abusing her little sister. And that's all it took for Lena to be called either a predator, a child molester, or an abuser every time she's mentioned for the rest of her days. Why? Because not only do the vast majority of people think reading an article means reading the headline, people are especially inclined to accept negative things about ugly people at face value because it's a testimonial injustice like we discussed earlier. They don't believe ugly people. They don't see them as credible. People don't have trouble believing an ugly person did something ugly. People assume ugly people are bad and beautiful people are good because they want to believe beautiful people are good, because they value them and they want to keep them, to be able to keep liking them in peace. So when a beautiful person is accused of something bad or horrible, more people are willing to question it, to investigate further, to defend them. Whereas people have no value for ugly people. They have no trouble discarding ugly people. So they don't have any issue accepting negative information about them at face value. Which is how conservatives were able to lie on Lena Dunham in the worst way, and everyone accepted it. Because we're united in Lookism. And do not take this discussion as me suggesting that Lena Dunham is a saint that no one has valid reasons for disliking or critiquing. No, not by any means. I am cognizant that just as I am discussing a testimonial injustice that Lena Dunham experienced, she has also participated in a similar kind of epistemic injustice. I'm thinking specifically of when her girls writer Murray Miller was accused of sexually assaulting an actress, Aurora Perrineau, daughter of actor Harold Perrineau, when she was just 17 years old. When this happened, Lena Dunham took it upon herself to jump out the window, to not just stand by her boy, or even to just defend him, but to full-throatedly call Aurora a liar and claim to have some kind of proof of Miller's innocence, which she did not have. So make no mistake about the discussion we're having. I am not saying that Lena Dunham is a perfect person without fault, nor that all criticism of her is unjustified. Lena Dunham is controversial. What I am specifically saying is that Lena Dunham is controversial, and in our Lookist society, we do not allow ugly people to be controversial and liked. The fact that Lena Dunham is structurally ugly is a critical factor in how she and anything she does is received and perceived, and it's a factor that must be considered when we analyze her actions as well as the reception to her actions, but it never is. What I am saying is that much of the vitriol for Lena Dunham and the willingness to accept either the worst lies or bad faith interpretations of her every word, or to disproportionately hate her for a fraction of what people can give a f about if it was done by other celebrities, or to not give her any credit for the positive things she has done, is because she's ugly. For example, in the same way that the same people who present Lena Dunham's defense of her writer as the legitimate reason they hate her guts have none of the same sustained vitriol for the likes of folks like, I don't know, Liam Neeson, who gave us a detailed account about how he would go around fantasizing about murdering random miscellaneous black men because his friend had been raped by a single black man. Just like those people, a bunch of who keep friends on replay continuously kicked Lena Dunham's back in because there were no black people and girls. Whole time, no black people were in Friends, and they ripped the whole show off from black ass living single. A fact.
Here's the story I know. I know that Warren Littlefield, who was the president of NBC at the time, was asked if there was any show you wish you had bought this season, what would it have been? And it would have been Living Single. That's the legend, at least what I've heard. Yeah. That he said, I wish I had bought Living Single. And the next year,
he did Friends.
Friends was on NBC.
So,
and we had the same production company. So it was Warner Brothers. One was on Fox, one was on NBC.
So we kind of think he saw Living Single and was like,
there was a formula.
Oh, we don't think, we know. I think so. Yeah. I mean, you know, and it wouldn't be the first time people see something and then say, if I just do this here, I'll be just as successful, and even more so.
Yeah.
Because, look at how they're going to support that and market it and promote it. Totally different from what
the most purest form you find I cut you off, I'm sorry.
No, that's fine.
You find a template or you find a formula, and the formula worked.
Yeah.
And I don't think the formula had been, maybe you could say Golden Girls because it was 4 women, but 4 women, 2 men. In their case, they had 3 and 3, and the formula worked, and so, boom.
But that's never stopped any of the people who kicked Lena's back in for girls from being all up Fran's ass. And not for nothing, I don't disagree with Lena's reasoning for why she didn't initially write any black characters in girls, and why, when she was criticized for not doing so, she wrote the black character that she did, a black Republican played by Donald Glover. Lena had explained, quote, "I'm a half Jew, half wasp, and I wrote 2 Jews and 2 wasps. Something I wanted to avoid was tokenism in casting. If I had one of the 4 girls, if for example, she was African American, I feel like, not that the experience of an African American girl and a white girl are drastically different, but there has to be specificity to that experience that I wasn't able to speak to. I really wrote the show from a gut level place, and each character was a piece of me or based on someone close to me, and only later did I realize that it was 4 white girls. As much as I can say it was an accident, it was only later as the criticism came out, I thought, I hear this and I want to respond to it. And this is a hard issue to speak to because all I want to do is sound sensitive and not say anything that'll horrify anyone or make them feel more isolated. But I did write something that was super specific to my experience, and I always want to avoid rendering an experience I can't speak to accurately. The common critique people have for shows like Friends or Girls is that they're based in diverse ass cities like New York City, but only feature white characters. But my unpopular counter opinion to that is yes, New York City is one of the most diverse cities in the world, where there are tons of other kinds of people present. And yet and still, we know damn well that there are a shit ton of white people living in the white ecosystems they've created for themselves within that city, and it's okay for them to create media that depicts their white ass lived experiences without trying to have to sandwich black people and other people of color into their little white ass existence. And I am saying this more so specifically as a defense to Girls, not Friends, seeing as Friends is not the retelling of someone's real white ass lived experience. It is actually a literal ripoff of a black show that purposefully sought to take a black world and make it white. But let me make sure I'm clear about what I'm saying for the racists who call a Klan rally every time any fictional character gets reimagined as black or a show is made to reflect a diverse world. Me saying that it's okay for some media to reflect white people's white ass lived experiences in their white ecosystems is not license for creatives or Hollywood to opt out of the responsibility to tell diverse stories, to create diverse characters, or to hire diverse writers and creatives to help them write the stories and create the characters that they cannot relate to or create solo. They absolutely have that responsibility. This is simply me saying that there are and can be stories we're not in because we don't belong in them. And Girls is one of them. Have y'all ever seen the train wreck that was the bitches and Girls? Excuse my French, but that was some white people shit, I'm sorry. And not like shameless white West advanced white trash shit, but maybe I could see a black character or 2 popping up, but white in a confusing, unique way that I'd never before seen depicted in media and damn sure never seen in real life. And while black people are not a monolith, I just can't see no Girls. I just can't see it. So the world Lena created in Girls, one that was created based on the world she inhabits in her real life, made perfect sense being white, but people kicked Lena's back in when Girls premiered. So in response to the criticism, in season 2, Lena introduced a black character as Lena's love interest, the aforementioned black male Republican, Sandy, played by Donald Glover. And then people kicked Lena's back in even worse, complaining that the character was a token. Meanwhile, that's exactly what they asked for. Whether they realized it or not, that's what they were asking for when they demanded the all-white world of Girls incorporate a black character into its world. They're obviously going to create a black character that could or would exist in that world, and that's precisely what we got. A token, a black male Republican, someone whose views contradict their own existence because they're willing to get in where they fit in because they so badly want to be accepted by the white man and to be in proximity to whiteness that being with any white woman is coveted so much that they'll be with even an ugly or undesirable white woman like Lena Dunham's character Hannah. That is a real phenomenon, which is why a running joke and stereotype within the black community is that the fattest or ugliest white woman could always get a black man who loves her down. Because while men generally see beautiful partners as status symbols to society, there are black people who believe a white partner signals that they are worthy because a white person has chosen them. So what an ugly or undesirable white woman lacks in beauty as a status symbol, she makes up for in whiteness. And for someone like Lena Dunham, in a white lookist world that thinks she's ugly, in that world, black women aren't her friends, so we're not there at all, and the only black men that acknowledge her are the kinds of black men willing to be a token in her world because of what her whiteness says about him, so that black man's presence is usually short-lived. Thus, Donald Glover's 2-episode run on Girls. Mother pressured the bitch to add a black character in her world and then got mad when she gave them exactly how black people exist in her world. Meanwhile, Not only did Donald Glover eat the role the up, it felt like a commentary within a commentary. Donald Glover himself is a black man who in real life is married to an Asian woman and has been widely accused of misogynoir and disliking black women for many years. So it's interesting seeing him play a black Republican character that doesn't think being black and Republican is a contradiction and dates white liberal women to feel closer to whiteness, only for those white women to point out the contradiction and in some ways question his blackness, all whilst desiring him for his blackness and denying that they see his color.
This actually opens up a dialogue about my work. Same kind of dialogue we've had about your political beliefs.
There's no dialogue. I know what I believe. I'm steadfast in it. I'm fine with it.
So you mean like even though you spend all this time with me and my gay roommate, you don't have any feeling that he should be allowed to have like a beautiful wedding like all the ones we saw earlier on Say Yes to the Dress?
This always happens.
What
I don't
always
even
happens?
This. Oh, I'm a white girl and like I moved to New York and I'm having a great time and so, oh, I got a fixed gear bike and I'm gonna date a black guy.
Maybe you should think about the fact that you could be fetishizing me because how many white women have you dated? Sounds like a lot from what you just said.
What?
Want to know what? I never thought about the fact that you were black once.
That's insane, okay? You should, because that's what I am.
Until you said it.
We got to see the dilemma faced by a black Republican man, the kind of black man who's willing to dismiss his own blackness and to date an undesirable white woman just to be in proximity to whiteness, but finding himself frustrated that the kind of white woman willing to be with him, a liberal, is woke enough to see and call him on the contradiction in his membership to a political party she knows hates black people, but not woke enough to know pretending not to see color is a bad thing. And we got to see the dilemma faced by a white woman who only exists to a particular kind of black man. The final scene between Lena Dunham's character Hannah and Glover's character Sandy alone had so much to be analyzed and unpacked. But we were robbed of those analyses by people's shallow outrage that the character was a black Republican who only appeared in 2 episodes. But the outrage to Lena Dunham's take on the character Sandy was child's play to the outrage sparked by another event that I think perfectly illustrates both Lena Dunham's lived experience as an ugly woman and a society that gaslights ugly people. Do y'all remember when Lena Dunham said that she sat next to Odell Beckham Jr. at the Met Gala and that she thought he ignored her because he thought she was unattractive? Child! What she specifically said was, quote, I was sitting next to Odell Beckham Jr. and it was so amazing because it was like he looked at me and he determined I was not the shape of a woman by his standards. He was like, that's a marshmallow, that's a child, that's a dog. It wasn't mean, he just seemed confused. The vibe was very much like, do I want to fuck it? Is it wearing a, yup, it's wearing a tuxedo. I'm gonna go back to my cell phone. It was like we were forced to be together and he literally was scrolling Instagram rather than have to look at a woman in a bow tie. I was like, this should be called the Metropolitan Museum of Getting Rejected by Athletes. I think about this often because the internet tore her up. People called her every kind of privilege, entitled white woman, and a sea of other criticisms that weren't entirely without merit, I guess. Lena Dunham did apologize, and I guess she's sure she should have, I guess. She didn't need to publicly share her incredibly descriptive assumptions about how she thought he perceived her as an assertion of fact. And yes, OBJ is under no obligation to acknowledge Lena Dunham, and he should be able to sit in silence without having this white woman publicly projecting her insecurities onto him. Sure. But while I'm always up for a critique of entitlement in white women, I just do not think Lena's remarks were ever about feeling entitled to his acknowledgement. She was sharing why she believed he didn't acknowledge her based on the reality that many men, especially men who are universally considered attractive like Odell Beckham Jr., but men in general, treat women according to how attracted they are to them. And you know good and well how we treat people who look like Lena Dunham, just like we're all aware of how OBJ likely did perceive her. Yes, it's his right to sit in silence, but we know why he sat in silence.
There is a blatant level of discrepancy and violence, oppression that happens when you are a person who is ugly. And one of the ways that manifests is in whether or not people desire you. Desire undergirds everything about the world in which we live. Desire plays a significant role in everything about how the world engages us. It determines who is employed. It determines who is housed. It determines who has path to friendship even. It determines so much about how we're engaged in the world and how people respond to us in the world. You have to be almost purposely ignoring these realities to be able to jump to those types of conclusions.
The amount of outrage and vitriol people gave Lena for her comments about being ignored by OBJ is top tier proof of how we gaslight the out of ugly people. And there will inevitably be people jumping and swearing up and down, no, it's just because it's Lena, and giving me every reason they consider to be valid as to why they just especially don't like Lena. But babes, this is always how people give it up when a mother dare talk about their experience as the woman men ignore the out of because they don't find them attractive. Lena Dunham is a woman popularly considered ugly and regularly torn the apart for her looks like she's the face of ugliness. Yet, it's somehow outlandish for her to come to the conclusion that a man who looks like Odell Beckham Jr. and dates women like Kim Kardashian ignored her because he thought she was ugly. As though we don't live in a society where ugly people are in fact ignored and treated differently. Lena maybe dragged it a little bit with all the specific stuff about him thinking she was a marshmallow and thing. So I'm sure there's an element of insecurity and projection, but two things. One, let's start acting like we as people can't perceive how other people think about us or whether people are attracted to us generally. And two, let's start treating insecurity like what it is, legitimate responses to lived experiences. It's ridiculous to think that someone who looks like Lena Dunham has not had a lifetime of being perceived as ugly by men and being ignored as a result. Insecurity is not a personal failure that exists in a vacuum. It's a response. In Belly the Beast, Deshawn said, quote, "The only logical step following the acceptance of ugly as political is that insecurity too must be political. If the politicization of ugly leads to the social, political, economic, and physical death of a person, they are bound to feel unprotected, uncared for, and unconfident. To that point, insecurities are valid. It is okay for us to be insecure in bodies that are constantly beat on and berated. Those insecurities don't change the reality of what anti-fatness or overall ugliness is and what it does. In fact, those insecurities better contextualize it. You can't beat people down forever and expect that they never feel the effects of that continued beating. Insecurities are not a personal indictment. They are an indictment of the world. Being that this is the case, people deemed ugly should run towards insecurity, not as a trauma to inform their politics, as it is dangerous to navigate the world of politics through trauma rather than informed praxis, but as a political tool that aids in developing their understanding of and relationship to oppressive power structures. In fact, what's ironic about people's outrage over Lena Dunham believing that OBJ ignored her because he thought she was ugly is that half the reason people respond so violently to everything Lena Dunham does is because they think she's ugly. Yet, they gaslight her for suggesting a man like OBJ probably glanced at her and never looked back. This is the epistemic injustice experienced by ugly people in a Lookist society. It's one that Lena speaks to at the core of girls. Lena's rationale for why she wrote Donald Glover's character Sandy the way she did was that he was very specific to her experience, which is what folks need to consider when they assess Lena's words, actions, choices, and the reception to all of the above. Her experience. Lena's body and her looks shaped how she experienced life, and she created girls in the image of her own lived experiences, and thus all of the characters, not just Sandy, are a reflection of that, especially the title character she played, Hannah. Remember I said earlier that Lena Dunham is one of the rare examples where we see someone who recognizes that they've experienced the world uniquely as an ugly person and tries to name that experience and is gaslit. Well, Lena Dunham is especially rare because through the show Girls, she shows that she not only understands herself to be experiencing lookism as an ugly person, she recognizes that she's being gaslit by the very people who think she's ugly and make her feel that way. Because throughout the show, Hannah expresses her awareness that people think she's ugly and fat and treat her accordingly, and her friends, who all demean her looks to her face and behind her back, still gaslight her about it to her face and reframe her awareness of how she's perceived as a personal insecurity that's her own fault, rather than the result of how she's being treated. And note what I'm saying, the problem is not being ugly, it's how they treat her for being ugly. Whenever Hannah verbalizes a negative experience she's had as a result of people thinking she's fat or ugly, Hannah's romantic interest Adam, played by Adam Driver, doesn't respond by criticizing the people who treated her negatively or the concept of mistreating someone because they're ugly or fat. He instead dismisses her feelings and tells her that if she wants to be beautiful or to fix the problem, she can just lose weight. And similarly, her friends tell her she could change her hair or the way she dresses or her makeup. What they're basically saying to her is, be attractive or don't be unattractive. All these people around her think she's ugly and they treat her like she's ugly, and they have no issue with a system of treating people like shit for being ugly. Lookism. In fact, they affirm the system because they never condemn the system that mistreats her for being ugly. Instead, they tell her she's not ugly and thus the system isn't hurting her. That's just her insecurity. But also, that she just needs to change how she looks so the system doesn't hurt her anymore. Both things cannot be true, but that's the epistemic injustice experienced by ugly people, and it's a core element of both Lena Dunham's real life and Girls. And it's an injustice that was reaffirmed by the wild hostility the public had to Lena Dunham's portrayal of Hannah. The result of portraying Hannah in Girls for Lena Dunham was an endless assault on her looks by a society that then kept spinning around and calling her delusional and insecure when she acknowledged that they treated her like the ugly person they stayed telling her she was. Lena said that the comments about her body in Girls was, quote, a trauma all of its own. Reflecting on how the critiques of her body negatively impacted her, Lena Dunham said this: I'd always thought there was something crude or superficial about caring how people responded to me. So I tried really hard in my 20s to act as if I didn't notice. I thought I could receive all this input about what a hideous cow I was and also hold on to this feeling that I'm essentially, you know, lovely. I wasn't hit with the signal that I was not correctly formed until the public really let me know. And the funny thing is, now I'm much curvier, bigger, or whatever than I was in my 20s. And it's wild to me that that body was the body everybody critiqued. The body of an anxious, emaciated, aching person. She added to that, referencing her then struggles with endometriosis, she said, I look at her and can't believe that little hurting girl was subjected to this. What does that say to everybody else in the world? Now I'm able to very proudly be in the body I'm in, recognizing what it has taken to get there. I think the question that Lena asked there is a good one. What does that say to everybody else in the world? For me, it says to me that we need to, 1, reframe insecurity as the result or proof of lookism and thus a societal failure, not a personal one. 2, instead of upholding lookism and gaslighting people about whether they're ugly, we need to destigmatize ugliness. And 3, we must stop chastising the people most marginalized by oppressive systems for internalizing that. A lot of the criticism Lizzo faces by people dying to find proof she's secretly fatphobic in some way is illustrative of my third point, that we must stop chastising the most marginalized by oppressive systems for internalizing them. If we are all in this lookist society, chasing beauty, trying desperately to buy in, and being told that fat is ugly, black is ugly, fat black women are ugly, why would you not expect that Lizzo, a woman who has not only lived her entire life in a fat body in that lookist society, but who has dealt with millions of people insulting her body, would internalize some of that fat phobia? Why do you think it's some kind of gotcha moment if you catch a person hating the body they're in or other people's bodies that look like their body they've been told to hate? Do you know how ridiculous it is to sit your fat phobic asses down and judge and criticize fat people at the first sign that they have internalized fat phobia? Or to criticize Lil' Kim or any black person who gets surgery on their nose or other black features that have been mocked relentlessly by the world? Do you think that because we recognize a system or structure oppresses us, that if we try to love ourselves from within that structure, that we are suddenly freed from the harm and negative impacts and internalized hate that those structures gave us? It makes perfect sense when people who are told to hate themselves come to also hate people who look like them. It might seem wild, but it makes perfect sense why some fat people don't want to date other fat people, why some trans people don't want to date other trans people, why some black people don't want to date other black people. Like insecurity, it is not a personal failure. It's an indictment of our society that has trained people to believe that what they are naturally is not and cannot be beautiful. And the only way to be affirmed is to either change something about yourself in order to buy in or to be loved by someone who is beautiful. Throughout this production, I've cited To Belly of the Beast and Bad Fat Black Girl, 2 incredible books I encourage you to buy and read. There's so much to be said about why I think each of these books are so important, but something I really appreciate is that Belly of the Beast offers us a guide on how we destigmatize ugliness and run away from beauty. And Bad Fat Black Girl gives me exactly the language to describe why I'm not quite there yet. Belly of the Beast quotes an essay entitled Moving Toward the Ugly, A Politic Beyond Desirability by Mia Mingus, where she got to the root of what we need to truly do to address lookism and the burden of chasing beauty and faring ugly. In that essay, she said this: we all run from the ugly, and the farther we run from it, the more we stigmatize it and the more power we give beauty. Our communities are obsessed with being beautiful and gorgeous and hot. What would it mean if we were ugly? What would it mean if we didn't run from our own ugliness or each other's? How do we take the sting out of ugly? What would it mean to acknowledge our own ugliness for all it has given us, how it has shaped our brilliance, and taught us about how we never want to make anyone else feel? What would it take for us to be able to risk being ugly, and whatever that means for us? What would happen if we stopped apologizing for our ugly, stopped being ashamed of it? What if we let go of being beautiful, stopped chasing pretty. Stop sucking in and shrinking and spending enormous amounts of money and time on things that don't make us magnificent. Where is the ugly in you? What is it trying to teach you? That is some powerful shit, and it's a lot easier said than done. It's one thing to recognize that we live in a lookist society, that chasing beauty harms us, that we shouldn't fear ugliness, and that we shouldn't wince at the word ugly as though ugly is the worst thing a person could be. But running towards ugliness, truly attempting to leave beauty and the quest to access its privileges behind, is an entirely different and far more difficult thing altogether. And it's not where I'm at yet. For reasons I think Cecily Bowen did an amazing job of summing up in Bad Fat Black Girl, where she said this: the bitter truth is that Black women do not have the luxury of resisting the patriarchy by refusing to participate in its beauty mandates. For those of us who are most marginalized, beauty actually becomes a tool that can be used to defend ourselves against racism, sexism, transphobia, classism, etc. We use it to lessen the impact of how we may be otherwise treated for being poor, trans, queer, female, or any other characteristic that the white supremacist capitalist patriarchy subjugates. That quote made me think of an exercise they had us do in one of our training sessions when I first became a public defender. I remember the instructor asking us some hypothetical that I don't remember exactly, but it was something along the lines of whether we would take advantage of pretty privilege to get cases called earlier, to get out of lunch early, etc. And my answer was, and still is, well, why yes. I am a Black woman in court representing poor Black people. The deck is stacked against me in so many ways. So if being pretty is the only thing that might could get a bitch case called a little early, I'm gonna take them little blessings. Shoot me with your big gun. Sometimes, for a lot of folk, beauty is one of the few things they have on their side. And we know that. It's the reason why when people talk about Monique, Lizzo, Jill Scott, or anyone whose body they feel they can't defend under the rules of our lookist society, they emphasize that their face card don't decline. It's why we often disregard hate and criticism about our face by reminding folks that all that aside, the body is tea or the face card is undeniable. I know that we need to destigmatize ugliness. And while I am not yet ready to run towards ugly, the first step to fixing a problem is acknowledging that it exists. So this is me acknowledging the problem and hoping you do too. Stop what you're doing and listen up. You just watched a video on one of my channels, but the Illuminati-verse is huge, and I want to tell you what everything is and how to find it. The Illuminati-verse has 6 channels. On the YouTube homepage of any one of those channels, every single channel in the Illuminati-verse is featured at the bottom of the page, so you can always easily find them, okay? Remember I said that. Don't say I ain't tell you how to find it. Subscribe to my main channel, Illuminati, to find my Illuminati productions, which are my long-form video essays, and also all of my backlog of content. Subscribe to my second love child, Illuminati Pop, for my weekly video essays analyzing my favorite TV and movie shows and characters. Illuminati Pop also has its own Patreon where you get all of those videos uncensored. Subscribe to my channel, Olay and Friends, for my podcast, Olay and Friends. New episodes of Olay and Friends come out every Sunday at 1 p.m. Eastern. Subscribe to Olay and Chill for new episodes of my podcast, Olay and Chill, every Tuesday at 1 p.m. Eastern. And also, both Olay and Friends and Olay and Chill are both available on streaming platforms like Spotify. Subscribe to Illuminati Bites if you want my takes, but you don't have an hour to spend. Subscribe to Illuminati Politics for my political analysis and my State of the Union type addresses on my show O Squared. And last but not least, subscribe to my Substack Illuminati for my written work.